what if getting things wrong is exactly what makes us, well, human?
Hmm.
And what if trying to get everything perfect, with all this incredible technology, is actually making us lose something essential?
That's a provocative start.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm your guide today, and we're going to explore a really fascinating collection of insights you've shared with us. And I'm joined by our resident navigator for these kinds of complex ideas.
It's great to be here. And yeah, it's a truly rich landscape of thought we're looking at. This material, it really digs into that intersection of rapidly advancing tech, especially AI,
Right.
and those fundamental, often kind of messy human experiences. Things like our purpose, the value of struggle, relationships, authenticity, all in this world that feels like it's changing so fast.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is basically to use these insights like a map, to try and cut through some of the noise and really explore that interplay.
Makes sense.
We want to understand what actually matters when the ground rules seem to be shifting all the time, and hopefully walk away with, a clearer perspective on how to navigate all this.
Sounds like a plan. Let's get into it.
Okay, so looking at this material, technology is obviously a massive force.
Yeah.
But what are the biggest forces of change highlighted here? Is it really just about the tech?
Well, that's one of the first big things the sources really emphasize. It's tempting, isn't it, to just point to AI or the internet as the only drivers. And they are huge, no doubt.
Sure.
But the material suggests it's broader than that. It's more like a tapestry. Yes, you've got the internet everywhere, social media amplifying everything, and now AI doing amazing things.
Right.
But woven into that are these significant shifts in our bigger social stories. Politics, yeah, but maybe even more deeply, changes in how we relate to each other and ourselves.
Okay.
And the sources definitely see these things as connected, often amplified by the very tech that's supposed to put us closer, ironically.
And that amplification, the material, connects it to some pretty concerning trends, doesn't it? It's not just abstract stuff.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets quite stark, actually. The sources point out how these technologies have risen alongside, well, some worrying statistics, rising loneliness, stress levels going up,
Yeah.
and tragically, even suicide epidemics. Now, the suggestion isn't always that tech causes these directly, like A causes B, but more that it can act as an accelerant, or it exaggerates this underlying feeling many people have of being disconnected or lacking control, maybe overwhelmed.
In this super connected world.
Exactly. It leads to that big question the material asks. In a world with perfect digital connection, why do we often feel so alone?
That is a powerful question. Okay, let's zoom in on AI for a second. The sources acknowledge its incredible ability, right? You can write a book, paint a picture, solve complex problems almost instantly. It's amazing at producing results.
Remarkable.
But the material points to a core problem with focusing only on that output. What's the central issue there?
This is, I think, maybe one of the most critical points in the whole thing. The central issue, as these sources frame it, is that we're neglecting the journey.
The journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're getting obsessed with the destination, the final product, the solved problem. And by doing that, we risk forgetting or maybe even actively devaluing how important, how uniquely valuable it is to do the work ourselves, to actually engage with the struggle that comes with creating something or solving a problem. The material is pretty clear. Life isn't just about having the finished thing. The process of getting there, that's where something essential happens to us.
So it's not just about the book existing, but the agony and ecstasy of actually writing it.
Precisely. That's the exact example they use writing a book. AI can churn out a flawless manuscript. Boom, done.
Right.
But the material asks, does that make the person smarter, more resourceful, better at wrestling with tricky ideas? And it argues, well, no. That excruciating journey, gathering thoughts, structuring them, finding the words, hitting walls, and figuring out how to get past them, that's what builds your capacity, your resilience, your ability to solve problems, not just on the page, but, in life.
Okay.
The finished book is just the evidence, the byproduct of that personal transformation that happens when you struggle through it. And that applies to anything, writing, building a business, learning a skill, navigating a tough personal situation.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so if we're potentially outsourcing that crucial journey, focusing only on getting the right answer instantly, how does this reliance on AI impact our basic human skills? And maybe most importantly, our relationships?
Yeah, this is where it gets really practical and honestly quite thought-provoking. The material paints a pretty stock picture here. If we just turn to AI for the right way to handle a fight with our partner or, what to say to a friend who's down,
Right.
we're completely bypassing the difficult, messy, but absolutely vital practice we need to develop those fundamental human skills.
Skills
Like genuine conflict resolution, expressing real empathy, learning how to just be there for someone, hold space for their pain, or simply knowing from experience what might actually help someone who's struggling.
You mean like that example the sources mentioned, asking ChatGPT how to apologize to your girlfriend?
Exactly that example. The AI might spit out a perfectly worded, logical apology. Technically, it could be right,
Sure.
but as the material points out, it lacks the personal struggle, the vulnerability. Maybe the awkward fumbling that makes a human apology feel real, feel authentic, learning how to say sorry properly, how to actually understand the other person's view, how to show remorse in a way that lands, that comes from trying, sometimes messing up, learning from it.
Okay.
Relying on AI means you don't get that practice.
So it's like we're giving up these skills because tech makes it easy to skip the hard part.
Uh-huh.
They compare it to forgetting phone numbers because we all have smartphones now.
The material uses that analogy, yeah, but it stresses the stakes are way, way higher.
Oh, so
Forgetting phone numbers. Annoying, maybe. But it doesn't fundamentally change your ability to connect deeply or navigate life's emotional complexities. But giving up the practice of, say, coping with stress or having that hard conversation with your partner or truly being present for a friend in need, that absolutely impacts your ability to function as a whole person and build real relationships.
Wow.
The image they use is powerful. AI might give you boats for calm waters, but if a storm hits, if real life throws difficulty or conflict your way, and you haven't learned to swim through struggle yourself, you could be totally lost.
That really hits home. And this whole struggle for authenticity, especially online now with all the AI-generated content,
Yeah.
it seems to be causing a kind of weird shift, right?
Yeah.
Why is human imperfection suddenly becoming valuable?
It's a fascinating turn, isn't it? And the material definitely highlights this. When technology can create endless amounts of perfectly polished, uniform content, perfect photos, perfect articles, perfect music, then genuine human touch, with all its flaws and quirks, suddenly becomes incredibly rare. And rare things tend to become valuable. Imperfection is starting to be seen almost as a stamp of authenticity, like, a human made this.
Like that Japanese idea, wabi-sabi, finding beauty in things that aren't perfect, that are temporary.
Exactly that. The sources really lean into that concept. Think about a slightly wonky handmade mug versus a factory perfect one.
Right.
Or the rough texture of tree bark versus smooth plastic. The material points to real shifts happening, like artists now being asked for proof, like affidavits, that their work wasn't made by AI, because collectors want that human connection.
Wow. And what about that story with the job interview, where the young guy in the perfect suit felt less authentic?
Yes, that's such a great illustration. The interviewer felt the suit was like a shield, too perfect, too practiced. They couldn't see the real person underneath. And the material argues that in this world, striving for digital perfection, what actually makes people relatable, even beautiful, isn't getting everything right. It's often the opposite. It's because we get things wrong, our struggles, our awkward moments, our unique little flaws. That's often where our real character shines through.
This whole conversation naturally leads to thinking about the future of work. The material also mentions potential job losses from AI and ideas like universal basic income, UBI. What's the perspective offered there?
Well, the material is pretty upfront about the uncertainty. It basically says, look, nobody really knows exactly how this will shake out. No crystal balls here.
Fair enough.
But it does raise a really interesting point, highlighting what it sees as a kind of irony in the current discussion around UBI and job displacement.
An irony. What's that?
The material notes that all this widespread concern, these calls for big solutions like UBI, they're getting really loud now. Now that knowledge workers, people in finance, coding, creative jobs, are the ones potentially facing disruption from AI. And it contrasts that with past tech shifts, specifically mentioning like the 70s and 80s when factory workers were losing jobs left and right to robots and automation.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Back then, the common advice, especially from what the material calls the ruling classes, was basically just tough luck, go reskill, learn a new trade.
So the response seems different depending on whose job is on the line.
That's the irony it points out. Now, the sources don't necessarily take a hard stance for or against UBI itself, but they use this historical comparison to make you question the different reactions.
Right.
And it also brings up those big questions about purpose and meaning. If your basic survival is covered by an income, where does your drive come from, your sense of contribution? Though it also cautions against just assuming people on welfare lack ambition. It's complex.
Definitely complex. No easy answers there.
None presented anyway. Just highlighting that contrast.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Beyond work and economics, the material also talks about personal fulfillment, happiness.
Mm.
What are the core ideas there about finding meaning in this changing landscape?
Yeah, this is where it gets more internal, more personal. The main idea seems to be that true, lasting fulfillment. It usually doesn't come from the external stuff, not just piling up more money or hitting some finite goal or this endless pursuit of growth.
So what does it come from?
It's found more in engaging with challenging things, pursuing a vision or a goal that's authentically yours. And this is key. Often a goal that's bigger than what you currently have the resources for.
That idea of ambition being bigger than your resources.
Exactly. The material suggests that when your ambition outruns your current skills or knowledge or network or money, it forces you to get creative, resourceful, adaptable. That's presented as one reason why, small startups can sometimes out-innovate huge companies with tons of resources. It's the constraint, needing to figure it out, that sparks creativity.
And gratitude plays a role too, right?
A huge role. Gratitude is highlighted as essential. And not just a quick thanks, but really practicing appreciating what you have, even knowing it might be temporary.
Like that fire anecdote.
Yeah, that powerful story about facing a potential fire and consciously practicing saying thank you and goodbye to possessions. It illustrates appreciating something fully right now, acknowledging it might not last.
Why?
Or finding gratitude for what you learned from a relationship that ended, instead of just focusing on the hurt. It's about appreciating the present and the journey, not just hoping for some future outcome.
Okay, going back to that earlier point about loneliness and disconnection being major issues, how does the material suggest we tackle that, especially when we're surrounded by digital stuff?
Right, this comes back to emphasizing the human element again. The answer proposed isn't more tech, but rather reconnecting with those fundamental human skills and really prioritizing genuine in-person community, what the material calls in real life community.
So AI friends aren't the solution.
Well, the point made is an AI might be programmed with perfect listening skills, but having an AI friend doesn't actually teach you how to be a friend.
Ah, okay. It doesn't build your skills.
Exactly. It's about actively building those relational muscles yourself. It means actively nurturing relationships, making dedicated time for friends, like literally scheduling it if you have to.
Yeah.
Learning to be vulnerable, to be open with people, finding ways to show up for others, acts of service. The material directly links those epidemics, loneliness, stress, suicide, to a breakdown in these real human connections.
That story about the masseuse being guarded, afraid to share, that felt very real.
It's a perfect example, isn't it? That fear of being truly seen, sharing your messy, imperfect self. It can be a huge barrier to deep connection. It leads straight to isolation. The material suggests maybe we're heading towards a kind of community revolution as people start actively seeking more meaningful connections. And it defines community really nicely, not just people nearby, but a group of people who agree to grow together.
I like that definition.
Me too. And there's that counterintuitive advice, too. Sometimes the best way to deal with your own loneliness is actually through an act of service, focusing on helping someone else who's struggling.
That ties back really well to the value of struggle and finding purpose. Let's circle back to that explicitly. The material really seems to champion embracing struggle, even failure. What's the value proposition there again?
The value is huge, according to these sources. Struggle isn't something to just avoid at all costs. It's actually the engine of growth.
Right.
Seriously, engaging with difficult things makes you smarter, better at solving problems, way more resourceful, getting the right answer instantly from AI. It bypasses the very process that builds your resilience and makes you capable of handling new, unexpected challenges down the road.
Like that story about the experienced firefighter knowing what to do.
That's a classic example they use. The veteran firefighter in a burning building knew instinctively to lie flat on the floor. Not because it was in the basic training manual necessarily, but because of years of hard-won real-world experience, years of wrestling with complex, dangerous situations. That wisdom came directly from struggle, not just being told the answer.
Okay.
And the material also reframes failure, suggesting that being very comfortable being a failure isn't necessarily bad, especially if it's because your ambitions are just bigger than your current skills.
Aiming high means you might miss sometimes.
Exactly. But that striving is what forces creativity and resourcefulness. And over time, losing the fear of failure, because you've been through it and survived, makes you incredibly capable. Even in relationships, they suggest that bumbling and fumbling your way through resolving a conflict can actually bring you closer than executing some technically perfect but maybe inauthentic strategy.
Okay, so putting all this together, the importance of struggle, skills, authenticity, community, what specific advice does the material offer for young people starting out today, especially thinking about careers and what skills to focus on?
Yeah, it boils down to some pretty clear practical advice. The core message is focus relentlessly on developing those core human skills and what the material calls real skills.
Real skills meaning?
Meaning skills that aren't easily automated or replicated instantly, skills that require personal effort, deep engagement, creativity.
Okay.
So human skills like conflict resolution, taking accountability, empathy, the stuff we said needs practice, and real skills like actually doing difficult creative work yourself, building something tangible, designing something complex, writing something meaningful.
So not just learning how to prompt an AI.
The material explicitly contrasts building those deep skills with just learning AI prompting, which it sees as maybe useful but not a fundamental long-term skill in the same way. And there's that powerful framework they mentioned, using 5 buckets you filled during your career: knowledge, skills, network, resources, and reputation.
Right, those 5.
And the argument is that the first 2, knowledge and skills, are the only ones that absolutely cannot be stripped away from you by external events, by what it calls a professional earthquake.
So those are the foundation, the most important to build first.
Exactly. They're yours, they're portable, they're resilient. And maybe the most critical piece of advice offered is about choosing those early jobs.
What's the advice?
The material strongly urges young people: choose a job based not on the starting pay or how fancy the company name is, but based on who you will be working for.
Find a mentor.
Yes, find a mentor. The personal stories shared really emphasize this. Choosing to work for someone who could actually teach you, guide you, even if it meant less money initially or a less glamorous title, provided an invaluable education. It fostered real growth, built capabilities that just chasing the highest salary or biggest brand never could have. It's framed as a direct investment in yourself through mentorship.
That is really countercultural advice, isn't it? In a world so focused on speed and getting ahead quickly.
It really is.
Okay, finally, the material touches on something really interesting. This idea of unexpected freedom sometimes coming from limitations, from friction. How does that relate to our world now, which seems designed to remove all friction?
It's such a powerful point to end on, I think. Technology, so often, its goal is to make things easier, faster, right? Remove the friction.
Yeah.
Sending mail was slow, email is instant, finding info was hard, Google makes it easy. Making music took instruments and practice, AI can generate it now. But the material suggests that sometimes that very friction, it actually served a purpose.
How so?
It forced us to prioritize, to focus,
Yeah.
to be more intentional about how we used our time and energy.
And removing the friction doesn't always mean more freedom.
No. Sometimes it just creates new kinds of pressure and instantly fills whatever space was gained. The classic example they give is work.
Yeah.
Before home computers, before internet on our phones all the time, the friction of accessing work stuff outside the office was high. So work mostly stayed at work.
Right, there was a boundary.
Exactly. And that created a boundary, a kind of freedom to actually disconnect and engage with home life, relationships, just personal time. Now, work is instantly accessible on our phones, friction's gone. But instead of feeling freer, a lot of people feel more stressed, more isolated, like they're always on.
Yeah, that resonates.
So the insight is that reducing friction, whether it's instant access to work or AI making creation effortless, can actually increase the pressure to do it now just because you can. This constant onness, this ease of doing everything instantly, can eat away at valuable downtime, squeeze out space for relationships, remove those accidental moments of pause or reflection that the old frictions kind of enforced. It really makes you question what we're really gaining when we make everything effortless.
Okay, wow. This has been a truly expansive deep dive. So many relevant insights packed in there.
We really have covered a lot of ground, challenging that focus on just the outcome, valuing the journey and the struggle instead, understanding why human imperfection and authenticity are kind of gaining value in an AI world,
Right.
recognizing that critical need to practice our human skills and nurture real-life relationships, and that practical advice about prioritizing knowledge, skills, and mentorship for long-term growth.
It's definitely a complex landscape, but this material offers some really powerful ways to think about it. tools, maybe, for the learner to navigate these changes and figure out what actually enriches life.
Absolutely. It really boils down to choosing where you invest your energy for the most meaningful return, beyond just, speed or efficiency.
So, as you navigate a world that's increasingly focused on speed, efficiency, getting everything perfect and frictionless, here's maybe a thought to take with you. What friction in your own life, something technology might offer to smooth away, might actually be protecting something you really value?
Hmm.
Could be your time, your focus, maybe just space for real connection. And building on that, are you willing to actively seek out moments of struggle, maybe even embrace a little imperfection for the sake of deeper personal growth and more genuine relationships?
That's a worthy reflection for all of us, I think.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope it's given you plenty to think about.